Hi, I'm Mary Jane Brixa from Lioness Publications. I want to do a session today. It might unfortunately be a little long because it's on the special elections in Florida. Now, we have elections for two representative seats, and unfortunately, for two of the people, I don't have their birth dates, but I do have it for the two GOP candidates. So what we're going to look at is the state of Florida's chart. We're going to look at both the transit, the progression, and the solar arc. So not both, actually three charts. And then we're going to look at the charts for the two GOP. So we're not going to be able to give a really definitive answer. We're going to do some, okay, this sort of feels like this thing is going to happen. Because we can't really, without looking at the Democrats' charts, really play them off against each other. But we can get sort of maybe a trend we're seeing on the GOP side. So and this is for the special elections on April 1st, which is this Tuesday coming up. And I do want to apologize that I'm still wearing the mask. I'm still having the allergies with the sneezing and the coughing. Seems whenever I'm wearing the mask, I'm not sneezing or coughing. So that's what I've been doing. So let's start off with Florida. And what we have here is we have the state of Florida in the chart, and we're going to look at about three different points here and talk about how that might impact the election. Now, the outside is the transit. The inside is the natal position for the state of Florida. And this is set for April 1st, which is the day of the election. And the timing is set for about 8 o'clock at night. So first, what I want to do is take a look at what we have transiting is Saturn, which is right down here. Saturn is making a connection to the natal Mars. Now, Saturn is thought of as being either restrictions or sort of focused activity. Mars is actions. Now, the type of angle it's making is not a nice angle. It's a stress angle, and it's called a square. So that means what's going to be happening is on the day of election, people are likely going to be pretty frustrated. This square is saying they feel restricted. So maybe they feel their choices are not the best. It could also mean that people are being restrained from going out to vote. So this is a possibility because Saturn, again, restricts, especially when it's in a square type of angle. And this is Mars, people's ability to do things or actions. So that is sort of a fact we need to watch. You see, if there's some type of, maybe bomb threats being called in, election places being closed, because that could sort of fall into this. If people all of a sudden can't vote, if their IDs are being questioned, that would also fall into this. Now, let's also look here at Uranus, because Uranus is making two angles here. So Uranus is also making an angle to that Mars. Now, Uranus is change. Now, typically, change for better or for worse depends on the type of angle. And in this case, the angle is not a good one. It's what's called an inconjunct, so it's a change and adjust. So in this case, we're looking at doing a change that is not necessarily change from what we were to something else that may not necessarily be ideal. This could indicate that, again, this is actions. It could be this is an indication that voters are going to be making changes in their voting habits, meaning that they may move from voting, let's say GOP, to move Democrat or vice versa. So this is an indication that, okay, something's up here. Now, this is not necessarily exact at that time, which means that it's an influence, but it's probably not going to be felt as much as maybe this Saturn influence is felt. Now, another thing we have is we have Uranus also making a square to Neptune. Now, here, square is, again, an unfriendly type of angle. Planets in that type of angle don't necessarily react well. They show off their negative side. So Uranus is change, Neptune is idealism, or in this case, it could be fantasies, being unrealistic. So this is calling into question exactly, you know, what do the voters want? Are voters happy with their choices? So we're looking at a change and, in effect, what people may want, fantasies or their idealistic situation. So the vote might reflect that. Now let's take a look at our next piece, which is the progression for the state of Florida. So this is sort of interesting. And what we're going to be looking at here is a few things that sort of play off the same angles we noticed in the transit. We see here Mercury, and that's making an angle to Mars. Again, Mars is action. And the angle it's making is, again, unfriendly. It's a stress. It's a square. So in this case, people are likely to do an action, but in effect, it's changing. So what they may be thinking they were going to do, they're going to change. So literally, it's looking at saying, okay, there's nothing I really want here. So they're likely sort of angry about it. So it's not a change where they're saying, oh, I like this. It's a change they're saying, well, I have to do this. So that's one of the things. Now we also have here, Mercury is actually in conjunct with Mercury down here in the natal chart. So again, this is a break and adjust. This could be indicating that people are just going to break off from what they would think they would vote for. And they may not even be able to explain. They just say, I'm not going to do that. So again, we're having a change of thought. Now, last thing I want to touch on in here is Venus here making an opposition to Uranus. Now, Venus is a social type of Venus indicating here is social communities. And we're looking at Uranus, which is change. It's an opposition, which is conflict. That means that somehow what may be happening as change here, or what's happening to the communities, is something that people are not going to like. So they're seeing changes that's affecting communities, and they're analyzing it. So this is something they're saying, I don't like this. So now let's take a look at the last piece for Florida, and that is the solar arc. And with the solar arc, we're only going to look at just one piece here. And I don't usually cover this one piece because it's sort of a point and it's called Eris. And it usually is an indication of struggles, of rebellions, of just things being demolished. And what we have here, and again, this is still Florida, we've got Uranus making an opposition in conjunct, break and adjust to Eris. So this is saying that people may be frustrated enough with changes that are going on that they actually think, what should I do about this? I need to fight this. So this is likely to show up at the voting booth. People that are dissatisfied. Now, it doesn't mean they're dissatisfied with the GOP or the Democrats, a specific party. They're just dissatisfied. So, this election actually, I'm going to be following pretty closely because I think it's going to be important in showing what a state like Florida, which has been Democratic before, has been, moved to the GOP. So it's got a history of going back and forth. What are we going to see here? So now let's take a look at one of the candidates. This is Fine. And he's the GOP candidate for one of the seats. So let's take a look at one of the angles he has, which is really an interesting angle. And it may be hitting a lot of people too, because on April 1st, we have what's called a yard setting up, which is two inconjuncts making a connection to one planet. So what happens here is that we have Uranus in his chart making an inconjunct to Uranus in the natal. But we also have Saturn making an inconjunct to that same location. Now, this yod is sometimes called the finger of God. And what it does when you have two planets making that type of connection, it's almost like it's a pointer. And it's a pointer to the planet, in this case here. That's a planet of change. Now, without knowing an awful lot about Randy Fine, I would have to sort of say that he may not be very comfortable with everything that's going on in his party. He may have difficulty adjusting to it, meaning this, in effect, he may be more of a straight conservative. So he may have difficulty with the changes that he sees coming. Or it could be that the changes are what's making him uncomfortable. So there's sort of a lot to unpack without really knowing Randy Fine well. But let's take a look at another one, which is also really interesting. And that one in this case is Neptune making an angle, a square angle, which is unfriendly, to both his Mars and Saturn. Now, Mars and Saturn are conjunct here. They're in the same space. Now, Mars is a planet of action. Saturn is a planet that holds back. They don't really like to be that close together. So in this case, this is an explanation of why he's not going out and doing fundraising. He's just like, he's sort of laid back. He's going to put his effort where he can actually get, certifiable results. So he's always going to be like that. But in this case, when we have Neptune in a stress angle, this is saying this may have worked for him in the past, but in this case, this is unrealistic for him to do that. So this could be an indicator that he has not done enough fundraising. He has not been out there enough to let people know who he is. But again, because of that yod, he may have difficulty identifying who he is or what he identifies with today. So that could be a problem in this one. Not so much, and I don't want to say a problem with Fine, but a problem if you're that person trying to identify, is this the party that's heading in the direction I want to go? Now, lastly, he does have Pluto that is going to be hitting his Pluto. But unfortunately, it doesn't make it yet. It's a good angle. So at some point, it looks like he will probably identify how he wants to portray himself, how he wants to lay down his foundations for the future. But that is not going to come till later in the year. Now, let's take a look at the last person here, and that is Jimmy Petronis. Now, we've got a few things going on here, and let's take them one at a time. We've got his Neptune making a opposition to Pluto. Now, this is a generational type of angle, and quite a few people may be feeling this if you were born around the 1972 period, plus or minus a year or so. So what happens is your idealism is actually bumping up against the foundations that you were born with. So you're born, you grow, and you identify with certain things in your life. But Neptune coming along is saying, is this realistic? It's conflicting with what I see out there now. So it's a time of soul searching, and that's hitting Jimmy, but it's also hitting a lot of other people right around that same time frame. So let's take a look at Pluto here, and it's making a nice angle to his Saturn. This is a really nice, it's an easy angle. It's called a trine, and it would be helping him to actually achieve his goals, except it doesn't come and make the hit, meaning that it gets close to making that trine exact, but it doesn't make it. It backs up. It'll happen later in the year. So this is an indication that something better can come along later. But right now, this is not going to help him a lot in this race. It would help a little bit, but not much. Now, let's take a look at another piece here, which is Mars. And a lot of times I don't go down to these small, like the Mars, the smaller planets that move quickly, because I'm trying to get an overall picture. In this case, Mars is making an unfriendly angle to his sun. Mars is a planet of action. Sun is individual person. When you have Mars making an unfriendly angle, it's like you're angry, you're upset, you're in a fighting mood. Now, this happens to everyone about every 2 years, and it's only for a few days. But in this case, it's almost exact. And it's happening on the day of the election. So this is not a great indicator that he's going to be making a great speech that night, for example. He could, but if he does, it's going to be, I would say, a lot of sarcasm in it. In addition, we have two other points here that are making a connection to his sun, and this is a conjunction. And I don't usually mention these planets because it gets a little bit too detailed. But one is the wounded warrior, and the wounded warrior is letting us know where we hurt. So and it's a place where we have to sort of not be able to go directly for what we want. We always have to go around. So this is making a connection to his sun. That's telling me that he may not be able to get to where he needs to go or wants to go via direct means. In addition, we've got Eris here, which is the point I mentioned earlier. And that is showing struggles, rebellion, destruction. And that's also with the wounded warrior. So this could be an indication of something that's going on in his personal life. That's why I don't want to get too much into it. But it's an indication that this is just a difficult period for him. And I'm not sure if that will help him in moving ahead with being elected. Because some of this may actually be shown when he's talking to people or when they're asking questions. So it could be things that he needs to resolve, which it looks like because of this Pluto coming in later, he probably will. So what I would like to say is that there's no indication here that either one of these two would win, but I don't have the Democrats' charts to say the Democrats would win. But looking at the Florida charts, my indication is to say that, I don't think two GOPs are going to win both these elections. I don't think two Democrats would win, but that could be a chance. Because I see a lot of dissatisfaction on the people in Florida with this. I think maybe there's enough retirees down there that they may not like what's going on with Social Security, that we start to see a sort of turn back to a flip to more Democrats. What I think will happen is probably one Democrat will win and one GOP will win. And it's hard to say which of the two GOP will win. Because I don't have, again, the Democrat charts. So we'll come back at the end of next week and we'll see what happened and whether my probabilities are correct or if they're way off. Again, I'm thinking at least one Democrat will win because I see Floridians are pretty dissatisfied. But I don't think it'll be both. But it could. But I don't see two GOP winning. Other than that, check out my website, lionesspublications.com. And I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you tune in for my next one. Take care. Bye now.